Hi there, Doc from Barcast Audio here today to talk with you about evidence on the bar exam on the MBE. We're going to be covering the most important subject on the MBE, subtopic on the MBE for evidence, relevance. Relevance questions make up the majority. Any subtopic questions on the multiple choice section of the bar exam are in relation to evidence. So let's jump right into it. So I mentioned this at the top, but relevance questions and what constitutes a relevant piece of evidence and what exceptions there are to this general rule regarding relevant evidence is going to make up 8 to 9 questions on the bar exam with regard to evidence. So that is a hefty sum. One of the larger subtopics we have in all of the MBE. If you can nail down relevance, if you can nail down the exceptions to the relevance rules, you are going to be well on your way to passing the bar exam. You're going to be well on your way to crushing your evidence questions because it just makes up such a large swath of those questions. It's such a core principle. You're going to be well on your way. So take this very seriously. We're going to try to give you some key principles to improve in your general rule statements there. So let's jump right in. So the general rule to remember here is that any piece of evidence has to be relevant in order to be considered for admission to court. So when is evidence actually considered relevant? You may remember this from your class, but any piece of evidence is considered relevant if it has a tendency to make a fact of consequence more or less probable than it would have been without the evidence. This means that if evidence is irrelevant, then it's not admissible. Unfortunately for us, the inverse is not true, meaning that just because evidence is relevant does not make it automatically admissible. It would be a lot easier for us if that was the case. Relevant evidence can still be excluded, and let's talk about the 2 instances where that can happen. Relevant evidence can be excluded where, 1, there's another statute or rule that mandates the exclusion of certain relevant evidence, or 2, it doesn't pass the Federal Rules of Evidence 403 balancing test. So the FRE Rule 403 balancing test provides that in order for evidence to be admissible, the probative value of the evidence must be substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. You've probably heard that rule already. It's probably no surprise to you. If you took evidence in law school, it's sort of one of the key fundamental rules you learn when you first start taking classes. And it turns out is a key fundamental rule when you're assessing these MBE questions. So keep that in mind as you're going through them. That sort of covers the basic elements of relevance on the bar exam, on the MBE. But now we move into character evidence, which is also tested under the banner of relevance on the bar exam, but makes for one of the more tricky subjects because of all the nuance to character evidence. So let's just start off by saying that character evidence is admissible. So what is character evidence? Character evidence is evidence that speaks to a defendant's character or a party's character or a witness's character and is admissible in 3 circumstances. First off, in both civil and criminal cases, character evidence is admissible to demonstrate a witness's bad character for truthfulness with the goal of impeaching that witness. So it's admissible for impeachment purposes of a bad witness. Second, in civil cases, character evidence is admissible where character is an essential element of the case, of the crime, of whatever is being alleged. Third, in criminal cases, character evidence can be admissible to prove the defendant acted in accordance with his character, but only if the defendant has already opened the door, so to say, by introducing his own relevant character into evidence. Now, we get into all the nitty-gritty details of these sort of opaque rules in our lectures on barcastaudio.com, but for now, just know those 3 big-picture rules. Keep them in mind as you're going through your MBE questions, and you'll have a better understanding as to what really is being asked. When is character evidence allowed in court? Those are the 3 instances. Bad witness, civil and criminal, you get that one. Civil, you get them where it's an essential element of the crime. Criminal, where the defendant opens the door to their prior bad acts. Keep in mind with that last rule, the prosecution themselves in a criminal case cannot open the door. That they can't do it. The defendant themselves has to open the door to their character evidence. But once that door is open, the prosecution can then kick it down. So something to keep in mind there. So now we touched a little bit, progressing through this, about relevant evidence of prior bad acts. In talking about character evidence, in talking about prior bad acts, you may think that, wow, that's kind of sort of a broad-ranging exclusion of evidence of prior bad acts by a witness or by a defendant. Now, that's not to say that evidence of prior bad acts cannot be used in court. And this is sort of the third fundamental understanding you have to come to in assessing these questions on the MBE. Evidence of prior bad acts can be used to prove things other than a party's guilt. They can be used to prove other elements of a crime. And let's sort of jump into the 5 exceptions to when evidence of prior bad acts can be used as character evidence. So if a party is trying to establish one of the 5 mimic exceptions, that's MIC, evidence of prior bad acts will be admissible even if the bad acts speak to or shed light on a defendant or a witness's character. So what are those mimic exceptions I just mentioned? The 5 mimic exceptions refer to evidence which speaks to 1, motive, 2, intent, 3, lack of mistake, 4, identity, and 5, common scheme. So, for example, if a defendant was caught with a bag of cocaine and his defense was he thought it was sugar, meaning it was a mistake, he accidentally grabbed a bag of sugar, the prosecution could rightfully get evidence into the case that he was caught doing cocaine in the past, and this evidence could be used to speak to a lack of mistake in this case. Now, keep in mind that evidence that this guy had done cocaine in the past or been caught doing cocaine in the past would not be admissible to speak to his character. It wouldn't be admissible to show this guy is a bad guy because he did cocaine. It would be admissible to do something like speak to the lack of a mistake. He clearly wasn't a mistake because he had done this in the past. Oh, let's say, for example, a defendant is arrested for robbing a bank, and he wears this ridiculous clown mask. And at the time of the trial, the prosecution attempts to get evidence into the case that this defendant had previously done a very similar bank robbery in the same mask using the same tools. That could be used as evidence to speak to a common scheme, a common plan that he had used to effectuate these robberies. But once again, just because this guy had committed a crime in the past or had worn a clown mask to rob a bank, that would not be admissible to show this guy was a bad guy, to speak to his bad character. It would be admissible to speak to one of those mimic exceptions. This concludes our video on relevance on the Multistate Bar Exam. We're going to do more of these videos on evidence, on other topics. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more of these. Be sure to check out barcastaudio.com for audio outlines, essay attack sheets, everything you need for the bar exam. Till then, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye now.